I want to bring Rob Levy in right now. You can find Rob at bordergold.com. Rob, I want to talk about, we had both the governor of the Bank of Canada, the chairman of the Federal Reserve weigh in over this last short period of time. I mean, the US dropped rates a quarter, Canada dropped rates a quarter. And one of the quick observations I had from their statements was, my goodness, did they write each other's? I've never seen it so overlapping. Concerns about employment. Here's a quarter point drop. We're still got uncertainty. I mean, all the same themes, at least.
Yeah, absolutely right, Mike. No Western economy right now in the world seems to be
Yeah.
immune to the factors that are going on. So, as you said, Macklem and Chair Powell almost in lockstep, and a good place for the Bank of Canada to be, especially with that weakening U.S. dollar, allowing them to drop in accordance with the U.S. Fed.
Yeah, that sure made that, at least if that was one of the variables they were looking at, meaning we don't want to lower if the US isn't, because look at the impact on the Canadian buck. Well, that was taken off the table, so that was certainly helpful. But let me throw something out at you. I looked at the statement. I could not think of the last time we had a governor of the Bank of Canada weighing in on US policy directly. And as I say, I couldn't remember another time.
No, I absolutely agree with you. The word almost atypical comes to mind with Macklem's remarks this past week, speaking in Saskatoon to an audience and weighing in on U.S. politics, and particularly its impact to the U.S. dollar and its reserve status, pointing to a couple factors, and one being the Trump administration's trade policies, which he views as destructive. And that's, supposed to be an independent central bank governor making those statements. And the other one then being politicizing the independence of the U.S. Federal Reserve, which is a story we've sort of been chatting about these past couple of weeks. But as you said, that erodes the haven status of the U.S. dollar.
It's interesting, though. I saw some stats a couple of days ago that just showed that on a percentage basis of reserves, the U.S. dollar hadn't really changed. It's about 57% of central bank reserves, globally. Euro was next at 20. Then you had all these other currencies for about 20%. So it hadn't, the de-dollarization theme wasn't there. But he was directly talking about the tariffs, and you understand why, because they're impacting Canada. But it was the political interference that I was sort of, what? He's talking about the Trump administration directly trying to interfere with the Federal Reserve.
Exactly right. And yeah, to your point, exactly as well. The dollar still is the only game in town. And, he goes on further to say that he doesn't see a world in which the dollar isn't the dominant player for now, because he sees no clear alternative to the U.S. dollar in the role of maybe how central banks would hold their FX reserves and where they're able to put money with, the other part of that. We've talked a lot about gold this past while, but, the U.S. dollar is still the sort of de facto or only game in town, but challenged, as you said, by this politicization of what's going on with the U.S. Fed. And, even cites a couple market examples where you think the U.S. dollar is the de facto safe haven, goes back to Trump and Liberation Day, where, that kind of market event happens. And what should happen, a U.S. dollar appreciate and long-term yields go down because investors look for safety in the U.S. dollar and U.S. treasuries. And he says, you look at that instance, and in fact, the opposite happened. So that's sort of saying, okay, this is giving him reason to think about it and have a little concern.
On both sides of the border, too. I'll just throw in this because we've been talking about it for a while on Money Talks. I think another big variable here, if we're talking U.S. dollar, is geopolitical events. Because, money goes, as Victor says, and we've had it with Martin Armstrong, money goes to the U.S. if there's a further flare up, I should say, of geopolitical tensions, with Russia. Tensions is a very mild word. War with Russia, so that's out there too. And that leads to both of the, heads of their central banks talking about uncertainty out there.
Uncertainty. And, it was actually interesting from Macklem's remarks as well, because, he actually proposed a solution for Canadian businesses. Of course, easier said than done. But, one of his key messages as a result of all this is look for diversification, so much reliance on the United States, and where you can have the ability to look elsewhere. The other big one, banging the table for a long time, Canadians need to invest in productivity and being more efficient. But, if for a central banker, to put this out there, here's the warning, but here's some ideas too. And diversification seemed to be a bit of a theme for him.
Well, as I said at the top of the show, when it comes to productivity, I'd like to see some activity. Actually, I was stronger than that. Rob, thanks so much for taking the time. And again, check out Rob at bordergold.com. He writes every week there. The gold market has actually been a wonderful place to be. He'll keep track of it for us. Rob, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mike.